inclusion is a part of most corporate agendas today. And yet, I think we have some distance to go before we can say that, this world offers equal opportunity to everyone. In fact, the gender pay gap in India, statistics show, is about 19%, which means that the average woman gets 19% lower than the average man for the same role, and I don't think that's a very nice statistic. Like Beverly mentioned, I have written a book called Equal Yet Different, which talks about, what do we do to get women to stay the course and to see them in leadership positions. So it's a research book, and I've been talking to a lot of women, professional women, and also HR people, HR heads, leaders, diversity experts, and people like that. That what can we do to change this situation? And I think the whole problem is to do with mindsets. So mindsets of women themselves and of organizations and of society as well. So today we are going to focus more on the organizational aspect. And to do that, we have this lovely panel here. All of them bring along with them very rich experience. And so I'm hoping that, that their insights, their practical wisdom will help us explore some answers on about this very important issue. Pankaj, looks like we are the senior most. I'm more senior to you, I'm sure. Oh, if that makes you feel better. Anyway, you are at the helm of an HR tech platform that serves over 500 top enterprises across Asia Pacific and has 2 million employees and serves 2 million employees. So you would obviously have a lot of insight on the DEI initiatives that companies take. From where I come from, I see that women are not only underrepresented, the numbers of course are very low, but also invisible. So you really don't see too many women in leadership positions, in decision-making roles, in industry fora, places like that, right? And even in companies where, they recruit at like 50% women, by the time they get into leadership positions, it's a pathetic single-digit figure for most companies. So what is your feeling? Do we start at the top? Do we start at the bottom? Where should we focus the initiatives on?
Thank you, Anita. And I can promise the audience this is my last time I'm up on the stage. This is all doing of Unstop team. But delighted to be here with wonderful panelists. And so my take is I'm not a great example. The company that I come from, I have 3 portfolios. One is People Strong, VBox, Stacked. But that ecosystem has 52% of women, Anita, in my company. Our chairperson is a women leader, Renuka Ramnathan. 2 out of 7 board members are women. My co-founder, who I lost to breast cancer in 2020, Shelley, was my co-founder was a woman. So I think I'm probably not the best example to say why at People Strong, but I can just share what I'm seeing in the market, and I'm extremely concerned.
Yeah.
We have a report called India Skill Report. Friends, you may have heard about it. You'll be amazed to know that the employability score of women is 53%. For men, it's 47. It's increasing constantly. But the participation of women dropped from 36 to 33 in last 2 years. Now, there is nothing wrong going on if you look at from a macro perspective. We've got the right maternity rules coming in. We have everything going in. Then why is it happening? So that's what baffles me. Well, so that's my big concern that's happening. Second, Anita, I'm still more worried about the total number of jobs. If you look at the numbers starking numbers that Ankit showed, 70% of the seats are only filled in UGC, 30% still go vacant. Out of that 70%, probably 50% students, 40% student passes out, which is 95 lakh, 1 crore, the number that you saw. And half of them only get the jobs.
So are you saying it's more of a mismatch?
It's the local pool of jobs is not enough for a country like India, because everything we look at in percentages, right? So number one, I will be more keen to increase the pool of number of jobs that India has. And then, of course, look at the women participation in it, because if we increase the women participation, India GDP will go up. Right, today is just 10%. India's GDP, our target of 5 trillion, we can cover in half of the time if women participation increases by 10 percentage points. So I think this is how I look at it, and I'm happy that somebody's having a conversation on it. So my 2 requests to everyone is that, can you just make sure that when you hire, you don't check the number of people who joined are women or not, but you start checking the number of CVs which were sourced. How many were women candidates, how many men? Just those basic changes might help. I think we have to correct this intake, not the output.
Absolutely. Access and opportunity really must be equal, and then you can take that forward. Yeah, Savita. Research has consistently pointed to the fact that, diverse companies are happier companies, more productive companies, more satisfied employees, more satisfied customers, and so on. And therefore financial performance as well, better financial performance. And still we find that, a lot of people are looking at all this as more of an HR initiative or a CSR initiative, when it's really everybody's business to be bothered, right? So tell me, how do you see this impact in your kind of a company? And how do you ensure that, currently, even if the figures look good, how do you ensure that they're not just feel-good things in good times and go on the back burner in tough times?
I think the toughest question starts with me today for the day. Okay.
So no, first, everybody gets tough questions.
Thank you. So I think the first thing is that if it's a feel-good, you can't sustain it anyways. And I don't even think we should waste our time, HR or otherwise, trying to do something that's feel-good. For me, the perspective on this is, Pankaj just spoke about participation. He spoke about getting greater representation when you join. I've found bigger challenges, not so much in getting people in, but getting them to stay and getting them to feel included, getting them to have equal opportunities. So for me, inclusion is the bigger angle on this. And one of the things that we are focused very heavily on in Asian Paints as an organization is because process-wise, you've kind of degenderized almost all processes, okay? So that it takes away bias to whatever extent possible.
That in itself is a big job.
Yeah, and it took some time for us to get there. But I think that's a basic. For me, that's hygiene. But once you've gotten there, I think the bigger challenge that we face is this whole inclusion, micro inequities. And therefore, the work that we've been doing over the last 1 year is really around this space of psychological safety. We've been working with experts, both global and in...
So give us some quick examples.
Yeah, so for example, we've been talking about how do you create an environment in teams that allows for equal voice of all members. That's a very simple thing to say. And because women naturally, and just to take an example of gender, don't speak up as much as men do. So you've got to create an environment.
When they do, people look at them.
Yeah, and they're like, oh, there's something wrong with them. Okay. But I think that, creating those equal spaces, that's a very small thing, but we're talking about creating psychologically safe spaces. Not just for women, but in general for all diverse workforces, whether it comes from a space of PWD, whether it comes from sexual diversity, or even it comes from experiential diversity. For a company like Asian Paints, I've joined the company about, a year and a half ago, but almost everybody in my leadership team is 25, 30 years plus. That itself is a big difference,
And so increasingly economic backgrounds, diversity in that.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think our space is inclusion and psych safety, really.
Okay. Yeah, Amit. When we're talking about so many problems, we find that Marico has done really well. And I was told that 58% of your overall talent and 46% of leadership talent in consumer-facing functions are women. It's quite an achievement because a lot of companies that have targets seem to fill them up with women in support functions. So tell us a little bit about what's your experience, what's the company's thinking?
Sure. So let me start with where Savita left. As a core principle, culture has to precede the number. And For the last 10 years, we have been specifically focusing on inclusion as a culture. And there are two, I would say, lines that we actually use very often. Involvement builds commitment, and gray hairs don't matter, gray cells do. And both of them represent the core of inclusion. Means involve people, get their thoughts on the board, because that's the best outcome that you can generate. Irrespective of gender, irrespective of the country of representation or the religion that they're representing, because we work out of around 27 countries, so the representation is extremely wide as an organization. The other piece is, while you're driving inclusion and diversity is an outcome per se, you should never ever compromise on meritocracy.
On, sorry?
Meritocracy.
Meritocracy, yes, of course.
And the impact that people create, the capability that they display through the impact that they're creating for the organization has to be the core fundamental on which diversity and inclusion has to be built. Otherwise, technically, it becomes an exclusion versus driving inclusion as an organization. So these are the two core principles that we have used. Have we used numbers as a guiding principle? No. The other angle is we are a fast-moving consumer goods organization. Now, technically, most of the shopping or the product decisions are taken by women at home. So we need to ensure a fair social representation in the organization, especially in the functions which are focusing on creating products and focusing on marketing per se. So that's the reason why we have been able to create an enabling culture.
I'm not surprised at all that Marico is known to be an innovative company. But a lot of people say, that there isn't a big enough pool to choose from. Have you encountered that? There isn't a big enough pool to select from.
So that has always been a challenge, because in FMCG, what we see is that the starting numbers are usually a little high, and the dropouts happen very fast, because it's the two biggest talent pool is sales and manufacturing. Both are physical. You need to be in the outlets and you need to be at the manufacturing site to do your job. So the fallouts are very large, but what we do is two things: our MAT return and the policy and the kind of support that we have created is something wherein we ensure almost 100% return after a MAT break or even a career break. So we have an enabling policy there. Second, what we ensure is continuous career and coaching. So one of the issues that you picked up, which was pay parity, and we measure it, because we are an investor-driven organization, we also report it. Technically, we don't have any pay parity issue, because it's an impact-driven organization. And today, 3 board members, 2 executive committee members are gender.
Okay, so culture, really inclusion, and equal opportunities, and trying to prevent the leakage in the pipeline.
So the focus has to be culture. Create an open and transparent organization, wherein people feel that they can bring their own self and they're able to represent their thoughts.
Sure. Let me come to Tanvi. Tanvi, you are in an interesting sector. Yeah? So in companies that sell cigarettes and alcohol, typically have been kind of low on DEI, and in fact, many years ago at least, I don't know how it is now, but there used to be a stigma with women working in these kind of sectors. So have things changed? And do you have any special challenges in driving DEI initiatives?
Thank you for the question, Anita, and thank you so much. It's an honor to be sitting here and learning a lot from all the panelists. The question is very pertinent, Anita. We are in the alcobev space, and it is a challenge when we go out for talent. One of our principles at AB InBev speaks very categorically about building diverse teams, which are very inclusive and collaboration. And when we take any initiative, that is the foundation that we focus on. Specifically, when Amit talked about manufacturing units, that's one of the major areas wherein it's quite difficult to drive the representation of women. And we took this challenge head on to say, let's try and break the barrier. 3 years ago, what we realized was it's not an agenda that you can simply drive by just hiring. There has to be a buy-in from the community. So one of our breweries, a manufacturing unit in Maharashtra, we actually did a mass community drive. We invited the families of the potential candidates. We explained how it's a safe environment. It's not a taboo. People are joining us for a career. And it was a moment of pride, and very happy to share that 3 years ago, we actually managed to get a brewery which was 50-50 gender ratio. Something unheard of, especially when you talk about alcobev. But that's just not it. I think Savita talked about, of course, it's important to have the intake, but then what do you do about it afterwards? And one of Another piece is that we started to focus on very fair reflections. Women don't necessarily speak up, they don't feel so included. So is there an opportunity that we have a development program which is full of mentoring, coaching, helping them? It's not exclusion, but primarily how do we make them feel equitable? And that's what we are also focusing on in terms of our program that we run at AB InBev, which is Stand Tall, which is primarily coaching them and helping them build on their personal brand. And just one last piece that I would like to add, Anita, here is, it's just not about the representation, it's just not about the development if you don't see the results in the business. Otherwise, it's just a good to have, right? Getting the brownie points. And one of the things we also realized as a result of this inclusive environment, not necessarily relating to just the gender, but the culture, as has been talked about at the panel as well, is the ability to innovate in the business. Last year, we saw in AB InBev 7 new products, very different from the portfolio we operate in beer, were launched. And that was purely because people could raise their hands and say, you know, I have an idea, and is it worth it to talk about? So once people feel that it's a comfortable space, they come up and they talk about ideas, and that also helps directly to the business.
A lot of times I find that the problem is with women themselves and the kind of social conditioning that they have, you know. When men can go and sell lipsticks and sanitary napkins, I really don't see why women can't sell alcohol or cigarettes. And I find a lot of women saying, but you know, I don't use the product, I'm not a smoker, I'm not an I'm not a drinker, but still, I think, so have you encountered stuff like that?
Yes.
Any interesting
I have,
story on that?
I think people before, in the initial stages, they consider our company as a taboo, as in alcohol. But the moment they come in, that doesn't even become the conversation. Not even the first point, second point, is just not the conversation. Because the focus here is, you are not here in the business of necessarily selling alcohol. We are here to create, dream big, create more cheers. And usually we have all these people later on realize that we are here for a very meritocratic culture.
Okay. Gaurav, let me come to you. You handle the manufacturing end of Coca-Cola, right? In a sense. So,
apart from sales and distribution, yes.
Sorry?
Apart from sales and distribution, manufacturing as well.
Yes, manufacturing as well. No, I'm particularly interested in the manufacturing bit because traditionally, again, you know, DEI has been has low figures in manufacturing, and there was always the belief that, you know, women won't do well in manufacturing. How do you put them on the shop floor? It's been going on as long as the women don't have toilets issue. I think women can't be on shop floors is also happening, right? So tell us a little bit about, you know, whether things have changed, whether you've managed to change things, mindset has changed.
Thanks for the question, Anita. It's good to be here. Thanks for inviting me to the panel. Quick shout out to my team who's sitting on row number 3 here. And we celebrated 137 years of Coca-Cola yesterday. It was a birthday. And part of the reason why we've celebrated 137 years is because as a brand, we are very inclusive. And when I talk about inclusion, it talks about gender, talks about preferences, talks about generations and backgrounds, ethnicities. Part of the question that you asked me on manufacturing, I think that's a stereotype that we've had for a long period of time. We've spoken about it a lot. And I've come back to India, I've been here for about 3 months now. I'm a returning Indian after a decade and a half. And I've seen that the argument is exactly where it was when I left it in the mid-2000s. Right? What I've seen change is in some organizations, they've moved the conversation from a good to do to an intention to make it a strategic priority. And they've started making steps, they've started taking action, and they've started putting it onto metrics. And in organizations, I know that what you put into metrics gets done. And I'll give you some examples from Coca-Cola. We've been operating in India for 25 years after we came back, right? And for a long period of time, and some of you on the panel would know, our manufacturing plants were mostly 99% males. And we used to struggle to get females to come and work. Of course, the Indian statutes didn't help, because if you were to look at the acts that we have, they would not allow females to work in the night shift. So how can you have associates who can only work in a certain particular shift, right? Because we are talking about equitable treatment to all. We took that as a challenge, and in one of the green fields that we started in the eastern part of the country, we worked with the government, And we said that we will have females in all 3 shifts, to a point where we have 66% females who are working in a manufacturing facility, and they do all the roles. And they do all the roles that in other plants it was stereotypically unheard of females to do. Whether that be running an operator or a pallet, which is basically putting cases onto a wooden pallet through a robo arm.
What changed? Did you look at roles through the gender lens and had a fresh look at it?
So I'll go back to what I was saying, a strategic priority. We made it into a priority about what can we do to enable the ecosystem. Because when we looked around, we realized that we don't have an ecosystem which enables women to work in the manufacturing setup. So how can we educate the government? How can we educate the statutory body and ensure that we get the right licenses to make this big transition? And we were successful. Now the idea is to take that learning, scale it up, replicate. And we've replicated that into another greenfield in Gujarat. Now we're starting another greenfield in Telangana. We'll replicate this learning. So basically, we put it as a strategic intent. We put metrics into place. We worked on the ecosystem, and now we are seeing traction. Yes, the numbers are still minuscule if you were to look at the larger scheme of things, but we've made a progress. We are clear about what's the blueprint for success, and we will continue to replicate and scale it up.
Mindsets, I think, coming back to that, is the most important. And I remember Anand Goenka of RPG was telling me that, traditionally they had only men in their manufacturing units, in their factories. And obviously, at that time, it was the right thing to do because, women can't lift tires. I mean, you can't expect that. But somewhere down the line, the plants got automated, but the mindset remained. So I think changing those kind of things and taking a fresh look at, roles, like working from home, many of the roles were not identified as being something that, people can do from home. And the pandemic forced people to kind of take a fresh look. So I think that is important. Yeah, Pankaj, coming back to you, sometimes policies backfire or are not totally effective, although the intent might be great. And you talked earlier about maternity leave. And I think, it's a very generous 6 months now of paid leave. I remember in my time, it was about a month and a half probably. In some places, even less. And even in the US, I think it's much lower. So I think it's a generous one. But smaller companies, startups are coming back saying we can't afford it. And typically, people are only working in companies for 3 years, 5 years, and then 6 months out of that to be paid leave. I mean, it is a kind of a real issue, isn't it? So sometimes, even because we're talking about campus hiring, and I had somebody who responded to the book saying that, there are companies that go to campus, and because they have, targets to fill, they interview the women first. And if they don't find an appropriate candidate, only then do they interview men. And maybe it's a smart or practical way to do it. But the issue there is that even the women who get in on merit get tagged as diversity candidates. And nobody wants to live with that. So just tell us, of the initiatives you've seen, what does it take for the initiative to work?
Anita, you're asking me to say something which will become a controversy. So I will still go ahead and say a show of hands. How many of you think that recruiters are biased or hiring managers are biased? I'll tell you my view for hiring women. Is it a recruiter's problem or a hiring manager? If you think it's a recruiter problem, raise your hand. If you think it's a problem of a hiring manager, please raise your hands. So I don't know what the rest of you believe, but assuming you see the answer, the problem is not in this community which is sitting in the hall. Problem is in the hiring manager mindset. Now, on no public forum, it will be fair to stand and say reduce maternity. It's a very bad thing to say, right? But the reality is the hiring manager who's hiring has a budget. He or she can hire 3 people this year. If he knows that this woman will be on a maternity leave, asking a question, are you planning for a family, is like ridiculous, right? Ridiculous. But if you're talking truth here, truth is people still do it. We all have to become comfortable, make sure what he said on targets, make sure our systems are masked. Don't let the gender and the name be prevailed till the last moment. And you see the number of women candidates will come up. It is bound to happen. It is just a problem and education of hiring managers that we've got to do. That's my take.
So, Anita, I have a point there. See, at the end of the day, we all exist to deliver the business, correct? See, business and people are intertwined. They're not separated. Okay, businesses will stop if we are not generating revenue and there's no employability there, okay? I think so as a community, we also need to ensure, because the hiring managers are always scared because they have a number to deliver. Let's face that fact, correct? And it's very important that as a community, you go and identify systems wherein even if there is a career break which is being requested, their job doesn't suffer. That much capability building and pipeline, the HR community needs to create for this particular initiative to actually work in an organization. Otherwise, it will never work.
Yeah, interesting point. Tanvi, now we have an added complication of technology coming in, right? And we don't know whether the bias is going to go up or down. So what is your take on this, and how do you prevent bias from coming in? Or are there things that you've thought about saying, now with all this, how do we make it less biased?
Very interesting question, Anita. I think there is a little bit of the fear that we are reading in media, especially with the chat GPT and a lot more AI coming, that what if the jobs are gone? I genuinely think it's absolutely a false fear. There's no need to be afraid of that, especially when we also look at internally what we are trying to do, adopting AI, not just in HR, and I'll talk about the HR technology, but also across all the other elements of business. Just to tell you, for example, when we do our calibration, we have something called as OPR 10x. OPR is a cycle that we call. What that AI tool does, it takes all the data from all the last years per employee, and it has been trained over the last 5 years to give out the right assessment. Now, of course, sometimes data can also not be right. And that's why then we use that data and again sit as managers to say, is the output given making sense or not? And more likely, like we have seen 95% now. Of course, back in the day, the accuracy was being taught. But now 97% of what this tool tells us is actually right. That doesn't, by the way, take anything away from discussing the talent. We still do. But that's how we are using that. I think second element is also, when we talk to humans, of course, we have emotions, we will have bias. But actually, I think AI helps reduce the bias. Like, for example, we have a bot who we call Stella, named after one of our brands. And people actually talk to her to say, hi Stella, I'm not feeling great today. I had a tough time with my manager. And what that chatbot does, it just listens anonymously, doesn't tell us who said it, but gives us the insights from which function, and then we can take action. So the point I'm basically trying to give here, Anita, with 2 examples is, tech actually helps reduce the bias, in fact, not increase it.
Okay. So Gaurav, let me ask you something else. I think diversity without inclusion, as everybody has been saying, has no significance, right? And research has shown that for any kind of minority, it really helps to have support networks, and they are huge enablers. So you have started, and Coca-Cola, some inclusion networks, right? So what was the thinking behind that? And tell us what is the impact that they've made? How do they work?
Sure, happy to share this, and this was a learning for us as well. So once we start off with the strategic intent that this is a priority we need to do, we looked around at enablers, how can we make it work? What support systems in our organization do we need to build? And what levers can we pull from the ecosystem? We learned that in terms of numbers, if we were to have senior female leaders who could mentor mid-level and entry-level female leaders, it would actually help them to see a career path, help them to shape their aspirations in line with their own personal ambitions. Right? To put this into a framework, we started a few employee resource groups. One of them is called WIN, which is Women Influencing Network. And the women leaders there talk about common issues that any women talent will face in the organization. They bring in allies, males as allies. They have those conversations openly with them. They learn from their experiences, so it's not seen as a network which is working in isolation, but it's seen as which is part of the organization. And that learning is brought up to the DE&I leader in the organization, so we can make changes to policies, to a structure, to our frameworks, so we become more equitable. Because the learning has been, it's not about being equal, it's not about being inclusive, it's about being equitable. And there are some groups in the organization which will need more support, more hand-holding in the initial stages to get them to an even keel. And after that, the talent and the capability will take it forward. Right? So that's really what we're trying to achieve through our ERGs. We also have dedicated programs wherein we help people create the level of awareness, help people get a good understanding about what are the anchors, what are the must-dos, and what are those conflicting priorities that will come and surface, and how do you address those. A program called Leveraging and Inspiring Female Talent, where we have inputs from leaders externally as well as internally. And we talk about business, understanding the business, getting a sharper acumen about what are the levers that make a business successful. How do you build a network which is outside your own comfort zone so that it can help propel your career in the direction where you want to take it. And then, of course, creating a network which is not just within the organization, but it has external linkages as well. So we are trying to experiment with this. And like I said, these are all experiments. Some which are working, we scale them up and repeat them. Some which don't work, we take the learnings and make the tweaks go as we go forward.
Absolutely. Maybe that's the way ahead. Two quick questions, one for Savita and then another one for Amit. So Savita, Asian Paints has been a dream company on campuses for a very long time, right? Do you feel that DEI is now an integral part of employer branding? And can you be an employer of choice without having the focus on DEI?
So I'll take the second question first. I think we've been on the top of those lists for over, for as many years as we've been on campus. So I think agendas change, priorities change, but that thankfully doesn't change. And it's not really about having DEI as an agenda that makes your employer brand better or not. Does it work for you? Absolutely it does. But I think irrespective of gender, what's important is the kind of roles you're offering, the kind of careers you're offering. They're as important to...
Equal opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely, to men and women. And I think on campuses especially, like I said, most policies we have gender neutralized. So when I do go to a campus, I would much rather look at talent. Like Pankaj was saying earlier, it's important to have selection plates that are equally represented. But finally, the output of who's perfect for your role or who finds themselves perfect for your role is a matter of the kind of jobs you offer and careers. So, should I have this as an agenda that drives employer branding? By all means, it's great to say. But I think I would rather focus on culture, on jobs and fitments rather than anything else. And then super fast career growths, which is why Asian Paints has been on top for a very, very long time and we continue to be there.
Sure. Amit, last question for you. You have an inclusion month, and I think a lot of us have talked about culture and stuff like that. So what's your experience? Do you believe that soft approaches like this are going to make the needle move fast enough, or do you require policy measures to undo a lot of the conditioning and a lot of the unconscious bias that already exists in the system?
So let me answer it from a principle perspective philosophy, and then I'll take an example. So purely as a principle, because we work out of so many countries, doing it in a particular period helps us evenly execute it. What we do is we actually give experiences to the supervisors, to the members in the organization with respect to what are the kind of, let's say, gender issues, third gender issues, representations, specially abled people. If we are specifically focused, so as an organization, Marico is focusing on 10 different disabilities that we can actually integrate in the workforce. And we are consciously going behind it across different geographies. So we give that experience so that the sensitization becomes far more live versus being a theoretical exercise that your HR person is sitting and explaining how you are supposed to deal with a very different talent. Okay. So that's the bigger perspective that we are trying to drive through the inclusion months, and it just makes a conscious, focused effort. So one of the bigger things that we achieved was around the third gender, the pride ally. And when we did the sensitization, a lot of people in the last 3 years have openly come out and said that we are a representative. in a social condition wherein currently we are not as open as a country, or in the other countries that we represent, we have almost 45, 50 such members in the organization who are wanting to express themselves, but not very comfortable openly coming out. But they want the policies to be aligned, they want the biases to be removed, they want even the dress code to be neutralized totally, so that people don't make sense out of what is it that they're trying to do. So there are a lot of benefits by driving such things. So that was the example. Thank you.
I think some very good insights and some very lovely thoughts on this very, very important topic. I think it's critical that we, as all of us as stakeholders of some kind or the other, keep this conversation going, because it's not just a moral or a social imperative, but it also has economic benefits. And so if we have to go forward, I think, including everybody and not wasting any of the talent that we already have is going to be very essential. So I want to thank all the panelists for sharing their insights and experiences, and for all of you also for being here and joining in this conversation. I'd like to request Ankit Agarwal to come and share his thoughts on this as well. Ankit.
No, I don't want to share anything on this per se, but there is one dilemma that everybody has. So when we speak to many of the recruiters and do these engagements, many want to hire, let's say, girl coders or a woman in MBA or in sales. Many a times, they are not able to do a specific engagement only because of, I think, legal or internal processes or so. But what we have found is that that's not true. Legally, and just in the interest of all, and not about engagement or so, legally, you cannot reject a candidate on this bias, okay? But you can actually throw an engagement or maybe a hiring on a campus saying that we are only here to hire women. I mean, that might reduce the whole debate altogether, correct? So whether, and still you're an equal opportunity employer. You're not saying that you're not an equal opportunity employer. It's just that I have certain seats to be filled and I want to be filled. Why can't we go out in open and say that, hey, we want women coders or women MBA or so?
Only female candidates need
only female candidates. I mean, you do 2 processes or so, because the biases come into the picture when the other candidates, see, legally as well, it is, or legally, morally, it is not right to reject a candidate on these bases. But you can actually select and you can announce that, hey, we need these.
Interesting. I think it's a very good insight. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.